It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and the church was beautifully decorated for the wedding of Michael, a well-respected man in the community, and his fiancée, Vanessa. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden floor. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect, and the air buzzed with excitement. The guests were all seated, waiting eagerly for the ceremony to begin. Michael, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, stood at the altar, feeling both excited and nervous. He had been through a lot in the past few years, and finding Vanessa felt like a second chance at happiness. Today was supposed to be the start of a new chapter in his life. But one person wasn't as excited. Sitting quietly in the back of the church, Michael's 12-year-old son, Ethan, watched with a heavy heart. Ethan had always been close to his dad, especially after his mom passed away when he was just a little boy. It had been tough for both of them, but they got through it together, leaning on each other. Now, with his dad getting married to Vanessa, Ethan couldn't shake the bad feeling that had been gnawing at him for months. Something about Vanessa didn't sit right with him, but no one seemed to listen whenever he tried to voice his concerns. As the music started playing, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin, Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had to do something. He couldn't let his dad make a huge mistake. Just as Vanessa appeared at the entrance of the church, looking stunning in her white gown, Ethan made up his mind. His hands trembled as he stood up, heart racing, and walked down the aisle toward the altar. His legs felt heavy, but he kept moving, knowing what he had to do. The guests began whispering as they noticed Ethan's approach. Some smiled, thinking he was just eager to be closer to his dad. But Michael, sensing that something was wrong, frowned slightly as his son stepped up beside him. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice shaky as he looked up at his father. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Ethan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The whispering stopped, and all eyes were on him. Michael knelt down, trying to keep his voice calm, though he was clearly concerned. "Ethan, what's going on? We can talk after the ceremony, okay?" But Ethan shook his head, his face pale. "No, Dad, it can't wait. You don't know who Vanessa really is." The room fell silent. Vanessa, now halfway down the aisle, froze. She looked at Ethan with a mix of confusion and anger. Michael blinked, not sure if he heard his son right. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and he fought to hold back tears. He had discovered something a few days ago, something that would change everything. He hadn't wanted to believe it himself, but the evidence was too clear. And now, standing in front of all these people, is Dad ready to marry someone who wasn't who she seemed? Ethan felt a weight pressing down on him. "She's not who she says she is, Dad," Ethan insisted, his voice growing stronger. "I saw things. I found out the truth." Michael stood up slowly, confusion clouding his face. He glanced over at Vanessa, who now looked visibly upset, but her eyes darted around nervously as if searching for an escape. The tension in the room was thick, and the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something serious was happening. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" Michael asked, his voice more stern this time. Ethan took a deep breath, glancing quickly at Vanessa before focusing back on his father. "She's not who you think she is. I found emails, messages. She's been lying to you about everything." Vanessa's face turned pale as she started walking quickly down the aisle, her earlier graceful movements replaced with urgency. "Michael, honey, don't listen to this," she said, trying to keep her voice calm but clearly shaken. "He's just a kid. He doesn't understand what he's saying." But Michael raised his hand, stopping her in her tracks. His gaze never left his son. "Ethan, what did you find? Tell me now." Ethan hesitated for a moment, knowing that once he said it, there would be no going back. His whole body was shaking, but he knew the truth had to come out. "I found out that she's been seeing someone else behind your back. She's been lying to you this whole time." A collective gasp echoed through the church. The guests exchanged shocked glances, some whispering in disbelief. Vanessa's face twisted in anger and panic, and she quickly stepped forward, pointing a finger at Ethan. "That's not true. He's making this up. Michael, you can't believe him. He's just trying to stop the wedding because he doesn't want you to be happy." But Ethan held his ground, his eyes locked on his dad, silently pleading for him to believe. Michael stood frozen, processing the bombshell his son had just dropped. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked from Ethan to Vanessa, then back again. He didn't know what to think. "Is this true?" Michael finally asked, turning to Vanessa, his voice low but firm. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm not lying, Dad," he said, handing the phone to his father. "It's all here." Michael hesitated before taking the phone from his son's trembling hand. The room was dead silent as Michael began scrolling through the messages, his face going pale as the truth unfolded before him. Vanessa, seeing the look on his face, began to stammer, trying to explain, but it was too late. Michael's eyes burned with betrayal as he dropped the phone to his side. "How could you do this to me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Vanessa took a step toward him, her face desperate. "Michael, please. I can explain." But Michael backed away, his hands shaking with rage. "Stay away from me," he hissed, his voice louder now. "You lied to me. You lied to my son." The tension in the room reached a breaking point, and before anyone could react, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I want her out of here," he said, his voice cold and detached. "Now." Vanessa's eyes widened in shock. She took a step back, glancing at the exit, her mind racing. The wedding was over, but this wasn't how she expected things to end. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding as the reality of what he had just done sank in. Vanessa's breath quickened as she looked around the room, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. She had always been in control, always knew how to charm her way through any situation. But this was different. The truth was out, and there was no smooth talking her way out of it now. Michael's face was a mask of fury, a side of him she had never seen before. She had counted on him being easy to manipulate, but now, with his son standing beside him, the walls were closing in fast. The guests, once filled with excitement for the wedding, were now whispering among themselves, exchanging looks of disbelief and judgment. A few had already pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle unfolding before them. Michael's sister, Karen, who had always been protective of her brother, shot Vanessa a look that could burn through steel. Karen had never liked Vanessa, always suspicious of her motives, and now it seemed her instincts were right all along. Ethan stood there, a little unsure of what he had just set in motion. He hadn't meant for things to explode like this, but there was no turning back now. He just wanted to protect his dad, to stop him from making a mistake that could hurt them both. But seeing his father in so much pain, watching the man who had always been his rock crumble before his eyes, made Ethan's stomach twist with guilt. Maybe there was another way he could have done this, but in that moment, all he knew was that he had to act. Michael lowered his phone, his jaw clenched, still shaking from the betrayal. His mind raced back to all the moments he had spent with Vanessa, all the times he thought she was the one. Had it all been a lie? The thought of being played for a fool, of falling for someone who wasn't who she claimed to be, made his skin crawl. He couldn't believe he had brought her into his life, into his son's life. The anger inside him boiled over, and he looked at Vanessa as though seeing her for the first time. Vanessa took another step back, her eyes darting toward the door as if considering her escape. But before she could move, Karen stood up from her seat, blocking her path. "You're not going anywhere," Karen said coldly, her voice sharp enough to silence the remaining whispers in the room. She crossed her arms, glaring at Vanessa as if daring her to try and run. "Karen, please," Vanessa began, her voice trembling now, no longer the smooth, confident tone she had always used. "This is just a misunderstanding. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Spare me the lies," Karen snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've been playing my brother for months. Did you really think no one would find out? Did you think Ethan wouldn't notice?" Vanessa's face paled as she realized just how cornered she was. Ethan, still standing next to his father, watched the exchange, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. He hadn't meant for things to get so ugly, but he knew there was no other way to stop her. He had seen too much, heard too many late-night phone calls, and found messages on Vanessa's phone that made his stomach churn. She wasn't just lying to his dad. She was a master manipulator, and Ethan had finally gathered the courage to expose her. Michael's mind flashed back to the nights he had spent with Vanessa, thinking they were building something real. All the signs had been there, the small moments of doubt he had pushed aside. He remembered the times Ethan had tried to bring up concerns, but Michael had been too blind, too eager for a fresh start. He had ignored the warnings, wanting to believe that Vanessa was the one who could help him move on from the pain of losing Ethan's mother. And now, here they were, in front of everyone he knew, his heart shattered, the woman he thought he loved revealed to be someone he barely recognized. Just then, the sound of sirens echoed from outside. Michael's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The 911 call. He had called the police without even thinking, driven by pure anger and betrayal. Now they were coming, and things were about to get even worse. Vanessa's eyes widened in panic. She turned to Michael, her voice desperate. "Michael, please, you don't need to do this. We can work this out. It's not what you think." But Michael shook his head, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's exactly what I think." His voice, though low, was laced with finality. The pain and anger in his words were unmistakable. The door of the church creaked open, and 2 police officers stepped inside, their faces serious as they took in the scene. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, approached Michael. "Sir, we received a call. Is there a problem here?" Michael hesitated for a moment, the reality of what was happening finally hitting him. His whole world had just crumbled in front of him, and now, with the police here, things were spinning out of control. He glanced at Vanessa, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes pleading with him to stop this before it got worse. But there was no going back. "Yeah," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet rage. "There's a problem. She's been lying to me, to all of us." The officer nodded, turning to Vanessa. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside and answer some questions." Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, and for a moment, it looked like she might try to run. But with the officer standing in front of her, and Karen still blocking her path, there was nowhere to go. She nodded reluctantly, her hands trembling as she followed the officers toward the door. As Vanessa was led out of the church, the guests sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do or say. Michael stood frozen, staring at the door, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. He had lost more than just a fiancé today. He had lost his faith in people, his trust. And the thought of what might have happened if Ethan hadn't spoken up filled him with dread. Ethan stood next to him, unsure of what to say or do. He had saved his dad from a terrible mistake, but he hadn't expected it to hurt this much. He looked up at Michael, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but all he saw was pain and confusion in his father's eyes. Michael finally turned to Ethan, his face softening as he reached out and pulled his son into a tight hug. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing." But even as he said the words, Michael knew that nothing would be the same again. The truth had been revealed, but the damage was done. As the police car drove away with Vanessa in the back seat, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on Michael. He stood outside the church, staring at the taillights fading into the distance. The sounds of guests shuffling inside echoed in his ears, but he couldn't bring himself to turn around. His mind was swirling with everything that had unfolded in just a matter of minutes. Vanessa's lies, Ethan's courage, the chaos of the wedding being torn apart. It was too much to process all at once. Karen walked up beside him, her arms crossed. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there quietly. She had always been the strong one in the family, the one who saw things clearly even when others didn't. Michael had ignored her warnings about Vanessa, convinced she was just being overly protective. But now, standing in the wreckage of what should have been his happiest day, he realized Karen had been right all along. "I should listen to you," Michael muttered, his voice filled with regret. Karen let out a small sigh. "You wanted to believe in her. I get it. But that's what people like Vanessa count on, Michael. They know how to make you believe in them until it's too late." Michael nodded, rubbing a hand over his face, trying to shake the exhaustion that clung to him. I didn't see it." "That's because she didn't want you to," Karen said, her voice softening a little. "You're not a fool. She's good at what she does. But Ethan saw through her, and that's what matters now." Michael glanced toward the church where Ethan was standing in the doorway, his expression still filled with uncertainty. The boy had been through so much already, losing his mom, watching his dad try to rebuild his life, and now having to be the one to tear it all down for the sake of protecting him. It wasn't fair, and Michael hated that his son had been put in such a position. "I can't believe he had to do that," Michael said quietly, feeling a pang of guilt. Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. He did it because he loves you, and because he knew you deserved better than what she was giving you. Inside the church, the guests were starting to leave, whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. Some were in shock, others seemed almost eager to spread the gossip, but all of them felt the awkwardness of what should have been a celebration turning into a disaster. The beautifully decorated hall was now just a backdrop to the painful memory that would linger in everyone's minds. Ethan walked slowly toward his father, unsure if he should say something. He had expected his dad to be angry, but seeing the pain on Michael's face made his chest tighten. Ethan hadn't wanted to ruin the day, but he had known there was no other way to stop Vanessa from becoming a permanent part of their lives. He had overheard things, seen things that made his blood run cold, and each time he had wrestled with whether or not to tell his dad. Now that the truth was out, he wasn't sure what would happen next. "Dad?" Ethan asked, his voice hesitant. Michael turned to face him, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. There were no words that could fix what had happened, no way to erase the hurt. But Michael saw something in his son's eyes that gave him strength, a determination to protect their family, even when it was difficult. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how else to." Michael cut him off by pulling him into another hug. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing. I should have seen it sooner, but I'm so proud of you for being brave enough to tell me." Ethan felt a rush of relief wash over him. He had been so worried that his dad would be angry or disappointed, but hearing those words lifted a weight off his shoulders. Still, the tension between them hadn't fully eased. There were questions that needed answers, and despite the relief of stopping Vanessa, the damage she had caused wouldn't disappear overnight. As they stood there, Michael couldn't help but think about the bigger picture. What had Vanessa been planning? How far had she been willing to go? The questions gnawed at him, and the fact that she had almost become a permanent part of his life made his stomach churn. He knew that this wasn't just about lies. It was about trust, betrayal, and the future he thought they were building together. And now, that future was gone, replaced by a cloud of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Karen was inside, talking to a few guests who lingered awkwardly near the exit. Some of them offered quiet condolences, while others looked too embarrassed to even make eye contact. Karen could sense their discomfort but didn't care. Her main concern was Michael and Ethan. Vanessa had almost ruined their family, and Karen wasn't about to let anyone forget that. As she spoke to one of the guests, she noticed someone she didn't recognize standing near the back, watching the scene with an unusual level of interest. Karen frowned, her instincts kicking in. She approached the stranger cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man, dressed in a simple suit, smiled politely, but didn't offer much explanation. "I'm just a friend of a friend," he said smoothly. "I was invited last minute. It seems like quite a dramatic turn of events today." Karen didn't like his tone. Something about the way he was watching the situation made her uneasy. "Yeah, well, it's not exactly how we planned things," she said, keeping her voice neutral. The man shrugged, his eyes flickering toward Michael and Ethan outside. "Life's full of surprises, I guess." Karen narrowed her eyes slightly. "Do you know Vanessa?" The man's smile faltered for a split second before returning. "We've crossed paths a few times." Karen's stomach tightened. Something was off. She could feel it in the way he was watching everything unfold, almost as if he were enjoying the chaos. "I think it's time for you to leave," she said firmly, stepping between him and the rest of the room. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get defensive. I was just curious." Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Karen with an uneasy feeling that this was far from over. Back outside, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the church grounds, Michael turned to Ethan, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "I need to know more," he said, his voice low. "What else did you find out about Vanessa?" Ethan hesitated, not wanting to add to his dad's pain, but he knew he couldn't hold back now. "There were phone calls," he began slowly. "Late at night, when she thought you were asleep, and messages from someone. I don't know who, but it didn't sound right, Dad. It was like she was hiding something big." Michael's jaw tightened. He had suspected there was more to the story, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. "I need to see those messages," he said. Ethan nodded. "I have some of them saved on my phone. I wasn't sure what to do before. But..." Michael sighed, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on him. This wasn't over. Whatever Vanessa had been hiding, whatever plans she had, they were just beginning to scratch the surface. And now, with the strange man Karen had confronted inside, Michael realized they might be in deeper trouble than he had originally thought. The wedding was ruined, but the fight for their safety, and the truth, had only just begun. As the night settled over the quiet town, Michael sat in the dim light of his living room, staring at the phone screen in his hands. Ethan had shared the messages he had saved, and each one made Michael's heart pound a little harder. There were cryptic conversations with someone Vanessa had been speaking to late at night. Messages full of strange references and plans that didn't make any sense at first glance. It was clear that Vanessa had been hiding something, but what was most disturbing was the urgency and secrecy behind it all. Ethan sat next to him, nervously glancing between his dad and the phone. He could sense how deeply this was affecting Michael, and it tore him apart to see his dad in such turmoil. Ethan had hoped that exposing Vanessa would put an end to the nightmare, but now it seemed like they were caught in something much bigger. The messages hinted at something dangerous, something far beyond what either of them had expected. "Do you think it's a scam or something worse?" Ethan asked cautiously, breaking the silence. Michael didn't answer right away. He was too focused on the final message Vanessa had sent before their wedding day, a message that simply read, "It's all set for tomorrow. Be ready." Who was she talking to? And what exactly had she planned for tomorrow? The wedding had been ruined, but what if there was more? What if Vanessa's goal hadn't just been to marry him? The thought made Michael's skin crawl. He had trusted her, let her into his life, and now he was left questioning everything. "I don't know," Michael finally said, his voice heavy. "But we're going to find out." Just as the words left his mouth, a knock echoed through the house, sharp and sudden. Michael and Ethan both jumped, their eyes darting to the front door. It was late, too late for visitors. The air in the room seemed to thicken with tension, and Michael's pulse quickened. Whoever was at the door hadn't rung the bell. They had knocked, as if trying not to draw too much attention. Ethan looked at his dad, worry etched across his face. Should we answer it? Michael stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He moved cautiously toward the door, peering through the peephole. A shadowy figure stood on the porch, their face obscured by the darkness. Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence, not after everything that had happened today. Taking a deep breath, Michael opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain latched. "Who's there?" The figure shifted slightly, stepping into the light of the porch. It was the same man Karen had confronted at the church, a stranger who seemed to know more than he was letting on. His face was calm, almost too calm for the circumstances. "We need to talk," the man said, his voice low and even, "about Vanessa." Michael's grip tightened on the door. "Who are you?" The man gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows more about her than you do. And if you want to keep your family safe, you'll hear me out." Ethan, who had come up behind his dad, whispered urgently, "Dad, don't let him in. We don't know who he is." Michael glanced back at his son, torn between caution and the growing need for answers. Every instinct told him to shut the door and call the police, but something in the man's eyes made him hesitate. There was a quiet intensity about him, as if he held the missing pieces to a puzzle Michael hadn't even fully uncovered yet. "5 minutes," Michael said, stepping back to unlatch the chain. "But if you try anything, I'm calling the cops." The man stepped inside, his movements calm and deliberate, as if he had been expecting this all along. He looked around the living room briefly before turning his attention back to Michael and Ethan. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, raising his hand slightly as if to show he meant no harm. "But you need to know the truth about Vanessa." Michael crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Start talking." The man took a deep breath. "Vanessa isn't who you think she is. She's been involved in something for a long time, something dangerous. She was never in love with you, Michael. She was using you as part of a larger plan." Ethan's stomach dropped at the man's words. He had suspected Vanessa wasn't sincere, but hearing it confirmed like this felt like a punch to the gut. Michael, however, was more focused on the details. "What plan? What are you talking about?" "There's a group," the man explained, his voice steady. "They target wealthy or successful people, people with resources. They get close, build trust, and then, when the time is right, they exploit them. Sometimes it's for money, sometimes for influence. But in your case, it's a bit more complicated. Michael's heart raced as he listened. What do you mean? The man shifted, lowering his voice as if even speaking about it was dangerous. Vanessa had access to things in your life that most people wouldn't think twice about. Financial information, business contacts. But that wasn't what she was after. She was interested in your connections, the people you know. And she wasn't working alone. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you saying there's more of them? The man nodded gravely. Yes, Vanessa was supposed to gather information, make you trust her. The wedding was just a part of it, a way to get even closer. When things started falling apart, they changed plans. That's why she was in such a hurry. That message you saw about tomorrow, she was referring to something much bigger than just the wedding. Michael's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. His life, his business, his family. Everything had been put at risk by this woman he thought he loved. But now, standing here, he realized it was never about love. It was about manipulation, control, and something far more sinister. What happens tomorrow? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes darkened. If they haven't already moved, they will soon. Whatever Vanessa was planning, it's already in motion. And if we don't stop it, a lot of people are going to get hurt. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The room seemed to grow colder, the weight of the man's words hanging heavily in the air. Everything was spiraling out of control, and they were running out of time. Michael's jaw tightened as he looked at the man, then back at Ethan. His mind was made up. What do we do now? The man hesitated for a moment, as if considering the gravity of what he was about to say. First, we need to find Vanessa, and then we have to stop whatever she's put in motion. Michael nodded, determination hardening in his eyes. They had no choice now. The wedding had been just the beginning of something much darker, and the real danger was yet to come. As Michael and Ethan stood in the tense silence of the living room, the weight of the stranger's words pressed down on them. They were caught in something far bigger than a failed wedding, something neither of them could have ever imagined. The plan was in motion, and if they didn't act soon, countless lives could be at risk. But before Michael could form a response, the man's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face tightened. They're already moving, he muttered, his voice edged with urgency. We don't have much time. Michael's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Who's moving? The man didn't answer right away, his fingers tapping furiously on the screen as if he were trying to decipher something. Ethan, sensing the rising tension, stepped closer to his dad, his eyes scanning the stranger's face for any hint of what was happening. Finally, the man spoke, his tone grim. There's been a change of plans. Vanessa wasn't supposed to make her move until tomorrow, but now it's happening tonight. Michael's heart skipped a beat. Tonight. Whatever Vanessa and her mysterious group were planning, it was happening right now. Where is she? Michael demanded, his voice tight with a mix of fear and anger. The man looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. There's a location. Somewhere she was supposed to meet her contact. But we don't know exactly where yet. We need to move fast. As if on cue, the quiet of the room was shattered by the sound of Michael's phone ringing. The sudden noise startled them all, and Michael quickly reached for his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. The caller ID displayed a number he didn't recognize, but something told him he had to answer. Hello, he said, his voice shaky. A woman's voice crackled through the line, low and panicked. Michael, it's Karen. I'm at the police station. Michael felt his stomach drop. Karen had left the wedding hours ago, but now she sounded like she was in serious trouble. Karen, what's going on? They're not letting me leave, she whispered, her voice trembling. I told them what I saw at the wedding, but they think I'm making it up. I don't know what's happening, but there's something wrong here. Michael's blood ran cold. Vanessa's plan was far more elaborate than he had thought. Not only had she deceived him, but now she had also manipulated the situation to the point where Karen was in danger too. Stay calm, Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're coming to get you. As he hung up the phone, the man in his living room gave Michael a knowing look. You won't get her out of there easily. Vanessa's people are connected, and they've likely already set up roadblocks. Michael's hands clenched into fists, Every moment was slipping away, and it felt like the walls were closing in. Vanessa had outplayed them at every turn, and now Karen was caught in the middle of it. They had to act fast, but every decision felt like a trap waiting to spring. Ethan, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, what if this is part of the plan? What if Karen's arrest is a distraction?" Michael turned to his son, the realization hitting him like a freight train. Vanessa had orchestrated this chaos so they wouldn't see the real danger coming. She had anticipated every move, and now, with Karen in police custody, Michael would be too focused on rescuing her to stop whatever was happening tonight. The man seemed to agree with Ethan's assessment. "He's right. We need to split up. One of you needs to stay on Vanessa's trail, and the other has to get Karen out of there before it's too late." Michael's mind raced. He couldn't let Vanessa get away, but he also couldn't leave Karen to fend for herself. The stakes were higher than ever, and no matter what choice he made, there would be consequences. "I'll go to the police station," Ethan suddenly said, stepping forward with a determined look. "I'll get Karen. You go after Vanessa." Michael stared at his son, conflicted. Ethan was brave, but he was just a teenager. This wasn't a game. It was real, and it was dangerous. But Ethan's eyes were filled with a quiet resolve that reminded Michael of himself when he was younger. Ethan wasn't a child anymore, and he wanted to help. "I can do this, Dad," Ethan insisted, his voice firm. "I know you don't want me involved. We're already in this together. I'll be careful, I promise." Michael took a deep breath, his heart aching with the weight of the decision. He wanted to protect Ethan from all of this, but the truth was, they didn't have a choice. Vanessa had made sure of that. "All right," Michael finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You take the car. Go straight to the police station and get Karen out of there. Don't take any risks." Ethan nodded, determination in his eyes. "I won't." As Ethan grabbed the car keys and headed for the door, Michael felt a surge of pride and fear all at once. His son was stepping into danger, but he was doing it for the right reasons. Michael could only hope it would be enough. Once Ethan was gone, Michael turned back to the man, who was already checking his phone again. "What now?" "We need to track Vanessa down," the man said, his voice cold and efficient. "There's one place she might go, a safe house outside of town. If she's meeting her contact tonight, that's where they'll be." Michael didn't waste any time. Grabbing his jacket, he followed the man out of the house and into the night. The air was crisp and quiet, but the tension between them was palpable. Time was running out, and every second felt like a countdown to disaster. As they drove through the darkened streets, Michael's mind raced with questions. What had Vanessa been planning? Why had she targeted him? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go? The man next to him seemed to sense his unease. "This isn't just about you, Michael. Vanessa's involved in something much bigger. They're after more than just money or power. They want control, and they're willing to destroy anyone who gets in their way." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What does that mean? What kind of control?" The man hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "They're part of a network. People who manipulate events from behind the scenes. They infiltrate lives, businesses, governments. And once they have what they want, they disappear, leaving chaos behind." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just about his personal life anymore. It was something far more dangerous, something that could affect countless others. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he had imagined. As they approached the outskirts of town, the man's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. "We're not the only ones looking for Vanessa. Someone else is closing in." Michael's blood ran cold. If they didn't find her first, the consequences could be catastrophic. There was no turning back now. The final confrontation was just ahead, and everything was about to unravel. But as they pulled up to the dark, secluded house on the edge of the woods, something didn't feel right. The air was too still, the house too quiet. Michael's instincts screamed at him to be careful. The man reached for the door handle, but Michael stopped him, his voice low and urgent. "Wait, something's off." The man paused, glancing at Michael with a frown. "What do you mean?" Michael's eyes scanned the darkness, his gut churning with unease. "It's too quiet. If Vanessa's here, she's not alone. We need to be ready for anything." The man nodded, tension crackling between them. They both knew this was it. the moment where everything would come to a head. But what they didn't know was just how deep the danger truly went. Michael's heart raced as he and the man approached the door of the secluded house. The stillness in the air felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. Every step closer to the house felt like a step toward something inevitable. He knew Vanessa was inside, but what awaited them beyond the door was a mystery, one that could change everything. The man held up a hand, signaling Michael to stop. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flashlight, clicking it on and sweeping the beam across the porch. Nothing moved, but Michael's instincts told him they weren't alone. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, the way his senses sharpened in moments of danger. Without a word, the man moved to the side of the house, gesturing for Michael to follow. They crept quietly along the exterior, the only sound the crunch of gravel under their shoes. The man paused at a window, peering inside. His face tightened as he motioned for Michael to take a look. When Michael looked through the window, he saw Vanessa sitting calmly in a chair in the middle of the room. Her hands were clasped together, her eyes fixed on the door. She looked too composed, as if she were waiting for something. Or someone. "What's she doing?" Michael whispered, glancing at the man. "She's expecting us," the man replied quietly. "This is part of her plan." Michael's chest tightened. Of course, Vanessa would have anticipated this. She had manipulated everything so far, leading them right into her trap, but there was no turning back now. If they didn't confront her, whatever she had planned would continue to unravel, and more lives would be at stake. The man nodded toward the door. "We go in, but we stay sharp. No sudden moves." Michael followed the man to the front door, his mind racing. He thought about Ethan, hoping he was safe, and Karen, still stuck at the police station. But there was no time for second thoughts. They had to end this. The man twisted the doorknob slowly, pushing the door open with a soft creak. As they stepped inside, Vanessa's eyes flicked up to meet theirs. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, and Michael's blood ran cold. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't scared. She was waiting. "Michael," Vanessa said, her voice smooth and almost welcoming. "I knew you'd come." Michael's jaw clenched. "It's over, Vanessa. Whatever you're planning, it ends now." Vanessa's smile didn't waver. "You think you figured it all out, don't you? But you're only seeing the surface." The man beside Michael stepped forward, his voice cold. "We know about the network, Vanessa. We know what you've been doing." Vanessa's eyes flicked to him, and she chuckled softly. "The network? Is that what you think this is about? You've been chasing shadows." Michael's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her gaze piercing. "This isn't about power or control, Michael. It's about something much bigger. Something you can't even comprehend." Before Michael could respond, the man beside him took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Stop playing games, Vanessa. We know you're meeting your contact tonight. Tell us where they are." Vanessa's smile widened. "Oh, you mean him?" She nodded toward the back of the room, where a shadowy figure stepped out from the darkness. Michael's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the face. It was someone he never expected to see. It was Ethan. Michael's world tilted. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Ethan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you." Michael's mind reeled. "Tell me what? What's going on?" Vanessa's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Ethan has been part of this from the beginning. He was never just an innocent bystander." Michael turned to his son, his heart breaking. "Ethan, what is she talking about?" Ethan's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Dad, I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't know how deep it all went, but I had to do something." Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. His son, his own flesh and blood, had been involved in this all along. But why? How? Vanessa stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. "Ethan came to me because he wanted to protect you, Michael. He knew you were in danger, and he did what he thought was right." Michael's voice shook. "Ethan, is this true?" Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad, Dad, but I couldn't let you go through with the wedding. I knew something was wrong with Vanessa, but I didn't realize how big it was. I thought I could stop it before it got out of hand." Vanessa stepped closer to Michael, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Poor Ethan, trying so hard to protect his father, But you see, Michael, you were never the target. You were just a means to an end. Michael's heart pounded in his ears. What do you mean? Vanessa's smile faded, her eyes hardening. You were a pawn, Michael, just like everyone else. The real goal was much bigger than you, bigger than any of us. The man beside Michael raised his gun, his voice sharp. Enough. Tell us what you're really after. Vanessa's gaze flicked to the gun, but she didn't flinch. You still don't get it, do you? You think this is about money, power, or some conspiracy, but it's not. It's about something far more important. Michael's chest tightened. What is it? Vanessa's eyes gleamed with a strange intensity. Survival. Before anyone could react, there was a loud crash from outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Michael's heart raced as the front door burst open, revealing a group of armed men storming into the house. Vanessa's smile returned. It's too late now. You're too late to stop any of it. The armed men quickly subdued the man beside Michael, disarming him before he could even react. Michael was frozen, his mind spinning with the realization that everything had spiraled out of control. Vanessa turned to Michael, her voice soft. I wish things could have been different, Michael. But now, the future is out of our hands. As the men began dragging Vanessa toward the door, Michael's thoughts were in chaos. His own son had been pulled into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. And now, with Vanessa's cryptic words echoing in his mind, he realized that the real danger had only just begun. But as the final twist of the night unraveled before him, Michael couldn't help but feel that they had only scratched the surface of the truth, a truth that would haunt them all. Michael stood frozen in the center of the room, trying to process what had just happened. His heart raced, his mind spinning with confusion and fear. The men who had taken Vanessa were gone, leaving behind an eerie silence. His son, Ethan, stood nearby, looking down at the floor, his face pale with guilt and sorrow. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the danger they were still in, was too much to bear all at once. Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He needed answers. Slowly, he walked over to Ethan, who hadn't moved since the armed men stormed in. Michael's voice shook, but he tried to keep calm. Ethan, you need to tell me everything. Now. Ethan looked up, his eyes red from unshed tears. Dad, I never meant for any of this to happen. I swear, I thought I was protecting you, but everything just got out of control. Michael sat down on the edge of the couch, his hands shaking. Start from the beginning. How did you get involved with Vanessa? And who were those men? Ethan sat beside him, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. It started months ago, after you told me you were getting serious with Vanessa. I didn't trust her from the start. She was too secretive, too perfect, like she was hiding something. So I started digging. Michael nodded, feeling the sting of guilt. He had been so swept up in his new relationship that he hadn't noticed anything wrong. He trusted Vanessa completely, but his own son had seen the cracks. Ethan continued. I found out she had connections with some powerful people. People who weren't exactly on the right side of the law. But the more I dug, the more dangerous it got. I thought I was doing the right thing by trying to stop her before she could hurt you. I didn't know it would lead to this. Michael rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it all. But why didn't you tell me? Why keep this secret from me? Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. I was scared. I thought if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And then, Vanessa found out what I was doing. She confronted me, but instead of threatening, Harris sighed. Vanessa wasn't just some con artist or criminal. She was involved in an underground organization that deals in, let's just say, unconventional means of survival. We've been trying to shut them down for years, but they're slippery. Vanessa was a key player, but she's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Michael swallowed hard, realizing the enormity of the situation. So, what happens now? We're doing everything we can to track down the group that took her, but I need you and your son to stay safe. You've been caught in the middle of something dangerous, and they might come after you. Michael's heart pounded. The danger wasn't over yet. What should we do? I'm sending a unit to your house to keep an eye on things, Harris said. And I need you to stay off the radar. Don't talk to anyone about this, and don't try to investigate further. Let us handle it. Michael nodded, even though a part of him wanted to fight back, to get to the bottom of everything. But he knew he had to think about Ethan's safety too. Thank you, Detective. Michael said before ending the call. Ethan looked at him, worry etched across his face. What did he say? Michael stood up, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. We're not out of the woods yet, but they're handling it. We need to stay low for now, let them do their job. Ethan nodded, though the guilt and fear in his eyes didn't fade. I'm sorry, Dad. I never wanted to put you in danger. Michael pulled him into a tight hug. It's not your fault, Ethan. We'll get through this. Together. As they stood there in the quiet house, the weight of everything that had happened settled over them. The wedding, the lies, Vanessa's betrayal, that all felt like a distant nightmare now. But the reality of the situation was far from over. Michael knew they had been lucky to get this far. The twists and turns of the night had brought them closer to the truth, but so much remained unanswered. Vanessa was gone, but her influence still lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't fade. In the days that followed, Michael and Ethan stayed out of the spotlight as the police worked to track down the men who had taken Vanessa. The investigation stretched on, with more questions than answers. But eventually, there was some closure. Vanessa's group was dismantled, with key members arrested and their operations shut down. But Vanessa herself? She had disappeared, vanishing without a trace. No one knew where she went or if she would ever resurface. Life for Michael and Ethan slowly returned to normal, though the scars of what they'd been through remained. They had come out stronger, though, with a bond that couldn't be broken by secrets or lies. As they sat together one evening, months after the chaos, Michael looked at his son and smiled. No more secrets, okay? Ethan smiled back, the weight of their shared ordeal finally lifting. No more secrets, Dad. And while they didn't know what the future held, they knew they could face it together.